In this demonstration, I'll show you how to evaluate angles using cosecant and the unit circle. What you'll need to be successful in this video are the following. You'll need to know sine, cosine, and tangent and their ratios. And you also need to know the special triangles. And of course the radian version. So this right here would be pi over 6. This would be pi over 3, pi over 2, pi over 4, and of course pi over 2. So let's start with question 1. In question number 1, they ask us to evaluate cosecant of the angle 5 pi over 4. The first thing that you have to determine is where this will land in the unit circle. Will it land in the first, second, third, or fourth quadrant? Now given what we have 5 pi over 4. This suggests that it will land in the third quadrant, and the reason why is because if this number were a 4, you would have 4 over 4, which is 1, and you would have pi, so that would be right there. Now it's just a little bit bigger than 4, so we assume that it's going to land here, but of course the unit circle that I have already references that, but in case you're not given one during the test or a quiz, it's important to use this method. So now that we've figured out that it's going to land here, the next thing we have to do is find out an equivalent angle to this one. And the way we do that is that if we have our angle right here, we're going to take our angle 5 pi over 4 and we're going to subtract it from pi. If your angle lands here, you always subtract your angle from pi. If it lands here, you subtract it from 2 pi. If it lands here, you will take pi minus your angle, and anything that lands here remains the way it is. So if we subtract these two, we end up with, doing this really quickly, putting a 1 here, multiplying both the top and the bottom by 4. We have 5 pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4. The denominators are the same, therefore we end up with pi over 4. The special triangle that we'll be using is the one that incorporates pi over 4. And it looks like this. Hopefully you have it memorized, where this is the square root of 2. This is pi over 2, pi over 4, pi over 4. Across from this is 1, across from this is 1. Now if you recall, all trigonometric functions found here will be positive, only sine will be positive here, only tangent will be positive here, and only cosine will be positive here. We're using cosecant. And cosecant, according to this chart here, cosecant is related to sine. Now since sine can only be positive here and here, it will have to be negative here and here. So the ratio that we end up finding has to be one that's negative. So if we take the cosecant of this angle, remember, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, therefore cosecant needs to be hypotenuse over the opposite because it's a reciprocal function. So the hypotenuse over the opposite will be the square root of 2 over 1, and remember, this has to be negative. It has to be negative because it is in this quadrant. Sine is only positive here. So our final answer for cosecant 5 pi over 4 needs to be negative square root of 2. Question 2 reads, solve the equation the square root of 3 times cosecant x plus 2 is equal to 0 on the intervals 0 through 2 pi. The first thing that we'll do is isolate for cosecant. And to do that, we'll bring this 2 over, making it negative 2. So we have the square root of 3 times cosecant x is equal to negative 2. Next, we will divide both sides by the square root of 3, and we end up with cosecant x is equal to negative 2 over the square root of 3. Since we want to find the angle that represents this x, which of the two special triangles represents these two numbers? Our special triangles look like this, and the special triangle that relates 2 and the square root of 3 is this one right here. Now remember, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, and sine is opposite over hypotenuse, therefore cosecant has to be hypotenuse over opposite. Which of these two angles will we choose as our reference? Let's start with this one. If we chose as our reference and we said hypotenuse over the opposite, hypotenuse is 2 and our opposite is 1, so it can't be pi over 6. Let's try pi over 3. Hypotenuse is 2, and our opposite is the square root of 3, so it has to be this as a reference angle. Now remember, cosecant is only positive here, and negative here and here. So to find out where pi over 3 lies in this quadrant, we're going to take pi plus pi over 3, which will give us this angle, and take 2 pi minus pi over 3, which will give us this angle. So let's do that. If we add these two together, make this over 1, multiply the top and the bottom by 3, we end up with 4 pi over 3. And for this one, make this over 1, multiply this by 3, and multiply this by 3, we end up with 6 pi over 3 minus pi over 3, and this gives us 5 pi over 3. So let's double check on our calculators. If we have 1 over sine 4 pi over 3, we end up with this number. But that's totally different than this one. So how do we figure this out? Why is our calculator giving us something different? Are we wrong? Well, remember, a lot of teachers will ask you to rationalize the denominator, which means that do not include a radical in the denominator. And to do that, we would multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3, and I do have a video dedicated to rationalizing the denominator in case you're curious as to what I'm doing here. And I end up with negative 2 times the square root of 3 over 3, which is what your calculator gives you. So there you have it. That is how to evaluate angles using cosecant and the unit circle. If you found this tutorial helpful, please support our channel by subscribing or by liking this video. If you have any further questions, visit our website at studyforce.com. We're an online service for students seeking free homework help. See you soon.